Today, this is a classic clip from the show Dragnet. I believe Michael's the only person that was around when this was actually on TV. Zach, man. Right? I did it back there. That's why I just said Michael, right? So anyways, from Dragnet, first of all, note the date in the upper left comes about 1967. About what time period did we have a fairly important piece of legislation? 1966. 66, right? So the white papers had kind of just come out and we were starting to look at EMS a little bit. So this kind of has some significance in its timing, all right, that we were starting to look at these type of things. And motor vehicle safety and traffic accidents and some of those things, those were some of the big things that drove the production of the white papers. So this also plays into what we're going to talk about today when we're talking about a lot of the different mechanisms of injury. You'll almost see just about everything he talks about through the lecture today. So we'll let him, this is called the 1 fatal second.
First second of impact, and they've broken it down into tenths. Now you're driving 55 miles an hour, and you have a head-on. This is what happens. In the first tenth of that fatal second, the front bumper and grill collapses. During the second tenth, your hood rises and strikes the windshield. Fenders begin wrapping themselves around the object of collision. You slam on your brakes, but your body is still moving at 55 miles an hour. You're zipping your legs for the jolt, but they both snap at the knee joint. During the third tenth of a second, your body catapults from the seat. Broken knees ram into the dashboard. The steering wheel begins to collapse. The steering column drives towards your chest. In the fourth tenth, 2 feet of the car's front end are totally demolished, but the rear end is still traveling at 35 miles an hour. Your body is moving forward at 55. In the fifth tenth, your body's impaled on the steering column. Blood rushes into your lungs. During the sixth tenth, the force of impact is built up so that your feet are ripped out of their shoes. The brake pedal shears off. The car frame buckles in the middle. Your head slams into the windshield. In the seventh tenth of a second, the entire car body is distorted. Hinges rip off, doors spring open, the seat flails, striking from behind. But it really doesn't matter. You're dead. You aren't around to experience the final 3/10 of this 1 second. Neither are your passengers. It doesn't take long to die.
Kind of ominous there a little bit, yes? So what he was portraying there, he's talking about, the body staying in motion, the going into the dashboard, into the steering wheel, all those kind of things. Now, he's talking about 1967, right? So there's a few safety features we've come up with between now and then, right? Seatbelts, for one, right? In 67, seatbelts were not very standard, and even if they were, not too many people used them, right? Crumple zones, lighter weight cars, right? The cars in the 1960s were heavy, solid steel. Yeah. All right, carried a lot of inertia behind them, and so the mechanism of injury was quite a bit more significant than it is today. But a lot of those principles still kind of play into how we look at the dynamics and the injury patterns of car accidents. All right, so. We're going to start chapter 27 here. Trauma, all right, is the leading cause of death among those aged 1 to 44. Okay, if you really sit down and think about that statistic, it sounds kind of scary at first, but then if you pick it apart, it's fairly predictable, right? People who are 1 through 44, how many of them have advanced diseases, high blood pressure, heart attack, strokes, all those kind of things, right? Not too many of them, all right? Unless you're the 31-year-old I had yesterday that was having a massive heart attack. All right. So it doesn't take much for trauma to kind of lead most of the medical causes because this is still a fairly young population. All right. But then when we add in all those people over 44, right, and we look at all the age groups, trauma still comes in at number 4. All right, which is still pretty significant considering heart disease, cancer, stroke, all those kind of things are above it still. All right, and in the mix. All right. So trauma is a fairly common thing, and it leads to death, all right? Recognizing the extent of injury is very critical in making decisions in order to get these patients the best chance of survival, okay? Recognizing that they either have a mechanism or an actual injury that needs immediate intervention at the trauma center and working to get them there as fast as possible, all right? We're going to talk about shock later on this week. trying to get them while they are still in that early compensatory phase, while the mechanisms are still working, the brain is still getting oxygen and blood, the kidneys are getting blood flow, right? We're perfusing the things that are important to keeping us alive, all right? And this takes a good solid assessment because these things are not always quite as apparent as they may seem, all right? So, the kinetics of trauma, all right? We know what a mechanism of injury is, right? Or we've talked about it a little bit, all right? The mechanism of injury is how your patient came to become injured, all right? Car accident, fall, gunshot wounds, stabbing, those kind of things, all right? We then use the mechanism of injury to anticipate where we might see injuries. That way, if we don't initially see them, we want to make sure we assess those said areas so that we don't miss anything. Does that make sense? Okay? So kinetic energy is the energy contained inside a moving body. Okay, so as we are moving, we have kinetic energy. All right, when that body then impacts something or changes direction, something applies another force to it so that it's not moving in the same direction anymore. That's when the kinetic energy changes, right? And when it changes both form and direction, that's where we get injuries to our body. Okay, at those places where that change happens. The science of analyzing mechanisms of injury is called the kinetics of trauma. So that's why that's kind of the headline of this particular section here, because we're going to talk about all the different mechanisms and where or what our body goes through and what we can then anticipate. All right? All right, predictors of injury are the patient's physiological indicators, the anatomy of the injury, and the mechanism of injury, all right? So when we look at the injury and trying to decide where is it, how bad is it, how are we going to treat it, those kind of things, we're going to take all those things into account, all right? So how do we determine kinetic energy, all right? This is an important formula. I would absolutely memorize this for testing purposes, all right? And more importantly, we need to know how these two things affect how much kinetic energy and therefore our mechanism of injury. Okay, the greater the kinetic energy, the greater the potential for injury. All right, so knowing what goes into calculating your kinetic energy, all right, and we don't stand on car accident scenes with a calculator and do the math, right? We're talking generalities here. All right, generally speaking, we want to determine is this a lot of energy or not as much, or make some comparisons. All right, so when we look at the formula for kinetic energy, it is mass times velocity squared divided by 2. All right? So mass times velocity squared divided by 2. All right? So when we're looking at just simply looking at this formula, which do you think is going to have the greater impact on our kinetic energy? Our mass or our velocity? Our velocity, right? Because we got to square it first before we put it in the equation. All right? So if I double the mass, we're just basically going to double the kinetic energy, correct? But if I double the velocity, how many times have I then multiplying that kinetic energy by? 4 times. 4 times, right? So we're making a real significant change in our kinetic energy. So when we're talking about car accidents, all right, we look at the size of the vehicle plays some importance, right? If we hit a small smart car with a large Suburban, clearly there are some mass differences there, and so there's going to be some changes in energy and there's some differences, all right? But the biggest thing is, if the Suburban is traveling at 5 miles an hour and the smart car is doing 55, right, we're very quickly making up for that mass with the velocity. Does that make sense? So one of the biggest key factors that we look for when looking at a car accident scene, all right, and looking at damage and things like that is we want to know how fast were those people going at the time of impact. All right, the greater the speed or velocity, obviously, the much greater instance for them to get an injury. Okay, fender bender on Mopac, oh, my neck hurts. Do we really have significant energy transfer here at a 5 mile an hour rear end impact? No, probably not. Okay, somebody gets blasted when their car breaks down on the side of Mopac by a semi truck at 55 miles an hour, and now we've got some energy impact, right? Because not only have we taken up the mass, but we've taken up the velocity as well. Make sense? Okay, talked about that, talked about that. Okay, not only motor vehicle collisions, when we start talking about penetrating trauma and cavitation, all right, your velocity is going to play a part too. We got some wonderful videos who likes ballistics gel. Yay. All right, and we'll show you the difference in the cavitation when we get to that, probably be after lunch sometime. So, some other forces that play a part is going to be acceleration and deceleration, okay? So we look at the old body at rest will stay at rest, right? We've all fairly familiar. We at least took one physics class in high school, yes? All right? Maybe? There was high school back then?
I was like,
yeah.
Hell.
All right, so a body at rest will remain at rest, and a body in motion will remain so unless acted upon by an outside force, okay? So we take that law into play, all right? And the faster the change of speed, whether it be acceleration or deceleration, all right, it results in more force exerted, okay? Where we see these acceleration and deceleration, right, forces primarily is going to be like in your rear end impacts, right? And your versus fixed object impacts, things like that, where a car is traveling at 45 miles an hour, it hits a brick wall and instantly stops, okay? There's going to be a lot more force applied to the objects that are moving inside that vehicle, the vehicle itself, that kind of thing, than if we had slowed down and maybe run over a couple other things, right, and slowly come to a stop, all right? So the greater the change in speed, whether it be to accelerate or decelerate, all right, is going to result in more force and therefore more potential for injury. Make sense? So energy likes to travel in a straight line unless it meets some sort of interference, okay? When it meets that interference, okay, the kinetic energy is then distorted, all right, and it can change direction and form, and when we change direction and form, that's where we get injury in our body, okay? So we've got Don Juan, right? He's in bed with the mistress, and the husband comes home. He goes out the second floor window and lands feet first on the ground, okay? Lands with his legs straight, all right? The force enters his body where? Where's our impact point? In our heels, right? Or okay, if we want to get real technical, okay? And it wants to go in a straight line, which it can do up our legs until it gets to where? It's our pelvis, our hips, our lumbar, that kind of thing. And then it can't travel in a straight line anymore because it meets all the bends and curves and everything that make up our pelvic girdle, the joint, the lower back, right? Remember our lumbar back's got a nice little curve to it, all right? And it can't travel in a straight line anymore. Now it changes form and direction because it's got interference, and that's where we get injury. If our knees were bent, we'd have injury there too, okay? So we're going to see injury at the initial impact site and then any place that interferes with that energy transfer that's been transferred from moving in a straight line. Make sense? All right. Anytime we have a vehicle collision, okay, whether it be vehicle versus fixed object, etc., all right, we have 3 different types of impacts in the vehicle, all right? Each time energy is absorbed, all right, and so we have a potential for an energy transfer that then can result in an injury, all right? So the first one, okay, is going to be the vehicle collision, all right? So I am in my vehicle, I am traveling 45 miles an hour down the road, I lose control, and I go head on into a large oak tree, it's 100 years old, stops my vehicle on impact, okay? So the vehicle striking the tree is impact number 1. Okay, I'm sitting in the vehicle, let's say I'm unrestrained because I'm an idiot and I don't wear my seatbelt, all right? How fast am I moving? The car was going 45 at impact. I'm going 45 miles an hour, right? And I am not restrained and there's nothing acting upon me, so what am I going to continue to do? Travel at, there you go, travel at 45 miles an hour, right? Until something does what? Object in motion will remain in motion until
Something stops you.
Something stops me, okay? That second impact is then going to be my body running into whatever, right? Windshield, steering column, dashboard, whatever I manage to come in contact with, okay? So now my body striking the vehicle is secondary. Now we've got additional opportunities for energy transfer, additional opportunities for injury, okay? The third one then, all right, inside my body, I've got all my organs. They're just kind of hanging out, chilling, floating a little bit, and some goo. Some of them are suspended by ligaments and tendons, that kind of thing, right? But they all they're not solidly in place, okay? So when I impact the steering wheel, let's say, what does everything in my body continue to do?
Go forward.
Go forward at 45 miles an hour as I impact, right? So now the organs crashing into each other, right, and the front side of my body, make up our third impact. Okay? So we've got vehicle into object, us into object, and organs into us. Does that make sense? Those are our three impacts. I would absolutely know those. Okay? Here's a nice little picture, vehicle tree. Okay? But now we have body versus steering wheel, and then we have organs versus the inside of our body. All right? Any questions on that? Cool. So some big things to remember about our mechanism of injury. It provides us a suspicion, not an accurate indicator. What is the best way to find out how many injuries or what injuries our patient actually has? Assessment, right? So we still have to assess our patient, okay? First and foremost, we're looking for the injuries that are actually there, all right, with an index of suspicion for what we might find or what we could find when we're looking, all right? That's what our mechanism of injury does. Just because we see something, right? So there may be a question on the test, okay, that says something along the lines of you see some scarring on the windshield and you're not sure if it's an airbag or from the patient's head. How are you going to figure that out? We're going to go look at the patient's head. You have that one already? All right, there you go. So if you put the patient's head, you got one right on the exam. Congratulations.
I got one.
All right. You at least got one, right? You got 74 more to go. All right. So no matter what, okay, airbags deploy. Airbag manufacturers say look underneath, make sure the steering wheel isn't deformed, right? Because they're not 100%. They're made to explode and then deflate as your body comes through. That's what slows the deceleration. For some reason, I put the two together and I can't get the decel one right. Okay? The airbag's not meant to stop you, because if it just stops you cold, does it do anything for you? No, it cushions you, it slows you at a slower rate as opposed to that sun's impact, right? It's not the fall that kills you, it's the sudden stop at the end. Okay, everybody's heard that term before, hopefully, right? Okay, we're going to apply that here. So, some common mechanisms of injury include vehicle collisions. Falls, which we'll learn a little bit later, is the #1 mechanism of injury for traumatic injury. Okay, the old people kind of skew that one for us a little bit. So then we have penetrating injuries, which are our gunshots and our stabbings, and then explosions. Okay, so those are our common explosions and common trauma. Kind of a little bit of a problem with that one, but we'll keep going with it. Okay, so in vehicle collisions, all right, we need to have a high suspicion of injury when there is, okay, evidence of high speeds, right? We're on a road with a high speed limit. Somebody says, yes, they were going X number of miles an hour, okay? Oftentimes, very significant damage will indicate high speeds, long stretches of skid marks before the impact, okay? Those kind of things for high speed collision, all right? Death of another vehicle occupant, we talked about this one the other day, right? If Kayla and I are driving together, all right? Kayla's driving this time, so I'm not, sexist towards the boys, right? So Kayla's driving, she crashes into a tree, I die. We're going to be highly suspicious of injury because the same mechanism of injury, right? And the same energy transfer and everything that killed me got to her too. So we need to be highly suspicious of Kayla's injuries as well. All right?
Just the point that Kayla can't drive because she's a woman.
Yeah.
No, because I crashed first. No. I crashed first. All right. We've had both a male and a female driver crash this car so far. All right. So, we most likely crashed it because we were driving on the wrong side of the road. Right? Yes. So, anyways. All right. Altered mental status. Okay, as we go along, we start talking about head injury. Altered mental status is going to be a big thing both in trauma and medicine. All right. It's one of the earliest and most reliable signs that something ain't right inside your brain. Okay, whether it's blood flow, whether it's glucose, whether it's injury, all those kind of things. One of the first things you see is somebody go halfway goofy on you. All right. So anytime you see altered mental status after a traumatic event, all right. That's why when we were doing we're talking about assessment, we talked about the Glasgow Coma scale, right? And we said, even if everything else checks out, man, if they're less than 14 on the Glasgow Coma scale, we run, because that indicates some sort of altered mental status, and it's a really reliable indicator for us. All right. We have a high suspicion of injury also when there's intrusion larger than 12 inches at the occupant site or 18 inches at any site, okay? And this will kind of vary by system. Some do a little bit different numbers, all right? But for our book's purposes, 12 inches at the occupant site, meaning into the patient compartment of the vehicle, okay? Or 18 inches anywhere, all right? So if the trunk's displaced by 18 inches, that's a significant mechanism, all right? An ejection from the vehicle, all right? That brings in a whole other bag of worms. One, all the injuries that we could have suffered on the way out of the vehicle, all right? And then it's not the flight that kills us, what is it? Sudden stop at the end, right? So we went through all the injury and mechanism processes on the way out of the vehicle. Now we've got to hit all three collisions again, right? Because now we're going to hit something, our organs are going to crash into us, right? And now we've got a secondary mechanism that's going to make our injuries even more substantial. The morbidity and mortality rates, if you end up not in the vehicle after a collision, are like astronomically high, all right? Not very many people survive being ejected from a vehicle, all right? So when we look at our motor vehicle collision, all right, each type of motor vehicle collision has a predictable pattern of injuries associated with it, okay? So we're going to look at the various different types of impacts, all right? So this is the graphic shows us not only the different types of impact, but also the percentage of time that they occur, okay? So frontal impacts, all right, meaning we strike something in a forward motion with the front of our vehicle, right? Fairly self-explanatory. We named that fairly well. Shouldn't be too confusing. All right. They happen about 32% of the time. Okay. Lateral impacts or T-bone, right? Everybody heard about the T-bone accident. All right. They're about 15% of the time. And then we have rear end, which happens about 9% of the time. Personally, I think that might be a little underreported, right? Because rear end accidents are probably some of our most common. But when you think about it, rear end accidents have both the rear end and frontal, right? Because for somebody it's frontal and for somebody it's rear end. Okay, it just depends on which one you are that day. All right. And then rotational, all right, these are going to be rollovers, okay, where we rotate the vehicle around and roll it over. All right. And they happen about, 38% of the time. Any questions on those? Perfect. So we're going to go through each one and talk about some of the mechanisms of the injury and where we can expect our injuries to be, all right? So in a frontal impact, the occupant is traveling at the same speed as the vehicle, all right? So then now we have the body, right? We talked about our three impacts, so now we have a frontal impact, so now we also have the body in motion, okay? And where it goes is going to kind of depend on how we're going to be injured, all right? So we have two routes of travel. We can go up and over, all right, or we can go down and under. And where we go depends on how we're sitting, how the impact took place, all right, our body type, all those different kinds of things, all right. So we can take a couple of different tracks. Obviously, this is going to refer to somebody who is not restrained, okay. If you are restrained properly with a lap and a shoulder belt, your body isn't going to travel far enough to have to make a decision as to where it's going to go. It's going to stay with the seat, okay? And some of the more severe, like very, very, very severe impacts, obviously, okay? We could have some, some breakage of the seat or something like that that could cause our body to travel a little bit farther than it normally does, all right? But most of the time when we're talking about up and over, down and under, we're talking about somebody who is not restrained in the vehicle, all right? So for up and over, okay, we're going to look for injuries to the abdomen, chest, face, head, and neck, all right? So we're choosing to kind of take the head first, up and over the steering wheel and the dash route as our body is starting to decelerate because it was traveling at the same rate of speed as the vehicle when we impacted, all right? So starting at the top, our head can impact things like the roof of the vehicle. If we go a little bit more high than anything else, we can also impact the windshield, okay? We can be ejected out through the windshield as well, all right? We could have neck trauma, all right, from catching the top of the steering wheel, the dashboard, depending on our height, broken glass as our head goes, maybe pokes through, or we get partially ejected through the windshield, okay? Our chest is going to be huge because what's right there in front of us at chest level that we're going to go crashing into that doesn't really move very well? Steering wheel and the steering column, all right? We're also going to have abdominal injuries as the bottom of the steering wheel catches our abdomen as we try and go up, okay? And then our pelvis is also going to have, and our hips are also going to be fairly significant for injury as well, because as we try and eject out and get hung up on that bottom of the steering wheel, we can have pelvic and hip injuries as well, okay? So up and over. If I have any questions on that? All right, so basically just think of your body trying to go over the steering wheel and out the windshield, where your impact points are going to be and what's going to take the most significant injuries. All right? So some things we can look for, all right, to say that this person maybe went up and over as opposed to down and under, okay? So taking a look at this picture here, all right, what are some things you see that indicate that this person may have taken an up and over route? We got cracked windshield, good. All right, what else we got? Steering wheel ain't right. Okay, we definitely have collapsed the steering column here. All right, what do you think about the dash up here? Does it look fairly well intact? Yeah, not so much. Okay.
It doesn't have low blood sugar, because look at all the candy.
Yeah, it doesn't have low blood sugar, that's for sure. All right, what else are we noticing that is gloriously missing from this picture? Our seat, right? So possibly removed as part of the extrication process, not something we typically do, all right? But most likely dislodged as part of the impact of the collision, right? What does that tell us about the energy and the forces involved in this impact? Pretty strong, right? So if we're gonna get it to where the seatbelt isn't even in the picture. It's not like, you know, just the back of it broke off or something like that. It's gone. All right. So good. So overall, we're thinking this is a pretty significant mechanism. Yes. Got some signs of a high-speed impact. We've got some good up and over impact. So was our patient restrained or unrestrained? Most likely. I'm going to say unrestrained, right? So the chances of us actually breaking the seat and then still traveling forward with enough force to do all that damage probably not going to happen, right? You're not going to be seatbelted into your seat going out like ejector style, like a military pilot, all right? If you're doing this amount of damage to the dashboard, you're free flying on your own, all right? Good. So one of the other things that the up and over starts to bring into play, all right, is what we call the paper bag syndrome, all right? This results in compression of the chest against the steering column, all right? You're more susceptible to it if you kind of inhale right at the moment of impact, so you go, right, and you got nice full lungs, okay? You go crashing into the steering wheel, and then the weight of your body coming behind it compresses everything, and you have the possibility of basically blowing out your lung tissue from that rapid compression. Okay, it's got to happen fast. If you think about blowing up a paper bag and smacking it, if you just slowly push on it, you're not going to get any sort of tearing or breakage, right? You got to hit it pretty good. All right. More susceptible the more your lungs are expanded, but it can still happen to you with your lungs not expanded as well. All right, so the paper bag syndrome comes into play. All right, starring of the windshield, okay, cracking of the windshield, all right. If we're trying to decide, right, between airbag and patient's head, that kind of thing, yes, we talked about assessment already, all right. But if you're looking at the actual windshield, there's a couple of clues, all right. Typically, this star pattern, all right, originates from a center point. Your airbag is not going to hit with that precise energy transfer that high up. Does that make sense? Your airbags are going to be more linear cracks down here, that kind of thing. This is from one section of your forehead hitting that windshield and the energy dissipating out, okay? Airbags are big, they're wide, they're bulky, they don't produce this type of star. Does that make sense? Okay. Oftentimes also we go and we look on the inside, we can find hairs stuck in the glass from where we impacted with our head. Pretty good indicator then that our head was the culprit as opposed to airbag. All right. Sound good? Huh?
I don't want to drive anymore.
No, it's just the red cars, because in all the pictures, the red cars,
There's-
one blue truck.
There's a blue one coming, don't worry. There's a couple other colors than red. Yeah.
Sometimes I do forget.
You'd be surprised how many people not from England forget, especially when under the influence of alcohol on a Friday night. I had a fatal one down south just this weekend. Thursday night down on 290, like Ben White. Lady got on going the wrong way. Luckily, she only killed herself, not anybody else.
I was going to say Waco. They just last night or this morning or whatever, there was a lady, of course, thank God she didn't cause anything, but they like got her off the road. She's on the other side of the highway. They're like,
Yep.
what?
You'd be surprised, right? We had a lot of them in the Phoenix area, which our intersections are, highway intersections are designed a lot differently than here in Texas. Here, you gotta know where you're going, because you have to get off the highway like 6 miles before the actual street. All right. In Phoenix, you can like drive up to within like a quarter mile of the street, and that's where the exit ramp just goes up to the street, kind of thing. They're fairly short.
And I bet you can drive both ways on the service road too.
No, you can only do one.
Shut up, Norm.
You can only do one, but you can at least get to near the street and see what it is. Like, so if you're like looking for a gas station, right? You didn't have to decide 6 miles back that you were going to get off, like you do here in Texas. Yeah, exactly.
Making that easy.
Anyways, so we had a lot more long-way drivers because it was really easy, right? You just made in the middle of the night, you made a right instead of a left, okay, and you ended up going the wrong way. Here in Texas, it baffles me how we end up with as many as we do, but you would actually be surprised how many wrong-way drivers we end up with.
The wrong way signs don't do anything to deter that.
Not when you're drunk. So, all right, questions on up and over? All right, so down and under then, okay, is a pathway that takes us exactly as it sounds, okay? You'll notice we name things fairly good for you around here. We don't try and get too tricky with our names, right? Down and under means exactly that. We're gonna go down and under the steering wheel of the dashboard as opposed to trying to take the ejector seat through the windshield, okay? So, as mentioned in Dragnet, right, he was talking about your knees hitting the dashboard, right, your broken knee, all that kind of jazz. Here's the down and under, this is what he was talking about, okay? So we're gonna look for injuries to the knees, okay, as they impact the underside of the dash, okay? So now we have an impact here. Where does our energy want to transfer and travel, right? Straight line back this way, so we can get injuries to our femurs, hips, pelvis, that kind of thing. A lot more susceptible to lower leg injuries. Not only that, but in a frontal impact, right, if we go down and under as the car starts to compact around us, what area gets compacted fairly heavily in a lot of cases? Down here, right, our dash tends to push in, crumple down, firewall gets pushed back, those kind of things, right, and are pretty significant collisions. And this is where we end up with a lot of our pin-in patients, right, where we have to go and we have to cut the car, roll the dash, do all those kind of things to basically free them, to remove the car from around them because it is crumpled in around where they are, okay? We can also see injuries in our spine, okay? Keep in mind too, our bottom hand of our steering wheel is also in place, so we can't fully rule out abdominal, chest, those kind of things, all right? This is where we find people typically kind of crumpled up. They'll either be on their side or very often they'll kind of be laid across the floor on both sides, those kind of things. Makes it a little bit more difficult to get them out of the vehicle because they usually end up down on the floor, all right? Questions on down and under? I didn't have nearly as good a picture on down and under because they really don't cause all that, great damage that's really identifiable other than maybe taking off a little bit of that bottom dashboard or just bending the underside of the steering wheel. All right, so moving on to rear impact, okay? So this is, again, like I said, yes, sir?
Which one's worse, up and over or the down?
Depending on speed and everything like that, they stay fairly similar. You would think that the up and over, you involve head, chest, abdomen, right? So if I had to pick one, I'd probably go there. But we can't, just because we're talking lower extremities, right? Femur fractures, pelvic fractures, those are two of our most fatal fractures, right? We can put liters of blood in a thigh and a pelvis. You break both your femurs, that's 1,000 to 1,500 each per thigh, right? You can bleed out internally inside your leg, like fairly quickly. We can put another liter in the pelvis if we break that, all right? So although it doesn't seem as bad, it can certainly be bad, but if I had to lean one way or the other, I definitely take the up and over just because of it brings ejection into play. It puts your head in the direct line of fire along with your chest, that kind of thing. All right, so just a completely different type of injury pattern, which is why we teach you to look for them, right? Because if you're going, oh great, his head looks good, his chest looks good. Meanwhile, right, he went down and under, and his femurs are both broken, and he's bleeding out. Now we've got a problem. You know what I mean? So rear end impact. Okay, so this is where our acceleration and deceleration forces come into play, along with the rest of our kinetics. Okay. So initially, all right, the head and neck are whipped back because as we sit in our seat, right, who wants to be my volunteer? I don't care, be the volunteer. Okay? So have a seat. All right, so you're sitting in your car, you're waiting at the stoplight, I'm not paying attention, and here I come, kaboom. Okay, and I accelerate you. All right, your neck muscles, all right, are fairly weak when it comes to holding your head up, right? When we look at your small neck muscles compared to pectoralis, quadriceps, all those kind of things, okay? So I accelerate your body out at whatever speed I rear-ended you. We'll say 45 miles an hour, right? Okay? Your head is going to do what? It's going to stay still, right? It gives the illusion that it's going back, but really what's happening to the lower half of your body? It's going forward and your head just hasn't caught up yet, right? So then eventually your head goes as far back as it can, it catches up and starts moving along with you, and then you either hit something, right, or stop, and now what's your head doing? Keeps going because your neck muscles aren't strong enough to hold it, and it snaps forward, okay? We call that what? Right, in lawyer term, we call it whiplash, right? You get a couple grand for it depending on how bad it is and how good your lawyer is, okay? Exactly. So a properly adjusted headrest and seat belts can obviously reduce this injury. Okay, if you look up at the top one, if this guy had a headrest, his head's not going to go nearly as far back as it would before. We kind of travel more as one as opposed to doing this big floppy back and forth. Okay. Then we can have subsequent injury, which can follow in up and over or down and under. Okay, so now we're accelerating again. All right, and if we hit something that's fixed, we now have a frontal impact, right? Okay, and we're in motion again, and here we go with all the different up and overs or down and unders from the frontal impact. All right, so initially we get that little whip back, okay, and then when we get a frontal impact again, now our head is whipping forward and our body is traveling forward, and we can go up and over or down and under. Make sense? All right. Another red car? All right, so it's kind of hard to tell, but that is the back end of somebody that got rear-ended very, very hard. All right, so rear impact there. Questions on rear? All right, when we get into head trauma later this week, I think, maybe Friday, I think we talk head trauma. We'll talk about what's called a coup contra coup injury, all right, which is common with a couple of different types of mechanisms. But when we start to talk about the whiplash, right? So as our head goes back, what inside our head starts traveling back with it? Our brain. And then when it starts to go the other direction, the brain does what? Crashes in the back of the cranium, right? And then when we do the opposite and we stop our head, what's our brain do? Still going, hits the front end, right? So we call it coup contra coup because we end up with possible brain contusion on both the front and the back. All right? So that's where that mechanism can start to come into play, right? We're starting to look at how we look for injury. All right. Questions on rear? Okay. So lateral impact. Okay. In lateral impact, there could be injuries to the head, neck, chest, abdomen, pelvis, extremities. Doesn't right? Everything's in play. All right. It really just depends on where you're sitting in relation to the impact. All right. How you're sitting, where the impact comes, how high on the car. All those different things, okay? We need to assess whether the patient bore the brunt of the impact, okay? If I'm sitting in the back seat of a vehicle behind the driver and we get T-boned on the driver's side, I'm at a much higher incidence or possibility for severe injury than if I was sitting on the passenger side, because a lot of that energy has then dissipated around through the person sitting on that side, et cetera, and I'm not taking nearly as much of the energy of that impact, therefore my mechanism for injury is going to be a whole lot lower, okay, than if I get blasted, right? If I get to take a bumper in the door right about my hip level, okay, and it comes in and hits me, call that, what is that called when the side of the car comes into the patient compartment? Intrusion, good, okay. How much constitutes severe mechanism? 12 inches, good, okay. So we got a little picture of that, not a red car, told you one was coming, right? We had a blue one coming, okay. So our lateral or our T-bone incident, okay? So here we're talking about lateral impact, okay? So you notice we've got an option for lots of different injury here, okay? So as we get hit, all right, this is a little bit better illustration, okay? So here's where the car should be. Notice now here's where the car is in relation to our body, okay? So that initial impact, if we go back over here, all right, where it hits and where it impacts our body, we can have injuries, but then we also have that whole in rest, in motion, acceleration, deceleration in play. And here we can have our head snap over as the bottom goes to the right, everything else goes over to the left. Now we've got our head in play because we've impacted the window next to us, etc. So see where we can basically got everything from head to toe in play, depending on where we hit. All right. Does this paint a little better picture of how intrusion works for you? Okay. So the measurement from here, where it should be, to here. All right. This is where we're talking about an intrusion, right? So you got to kind of just get a general idea where you think the car should have been, and see how far it got pushed in. All right. And if you think about it, right, how many people have regular four-door sedan or ridden in one recently, right? When you sit in the back seat or even in the front seat, how much room is between the outside panel of the door and your body?
About 3 inches.
Not a lot, right? Most doors are about 3, maybe 4 inches thick. You got maybe a couple inches between you and the door, all right? Think about 12 inches, right? That's about 6 inches of you that took bumper and all the impact and speed and energy that created, right? And pushed you the other direction. So when we talk about intrusion, 12 inches, right? It doesn't seem like a whole lot, but those inches get eaten up real fast before it makes it to your body for an impact. All right? Questions on lateral? Cool. Rollover or rotational. All right? These injury patterns are far less predictable. We just basically got to put everything in play. All right? And the reason for that is because in rollovers, especially if we're unrestrained, we have multiple impacts. All right, so the car begins to roll, and you leave your seat, and we'll show there's a picture of it, right? And you balance on the side and the roof and the other side and then back around again, right? And that car hits multiple times as it's tumbling down the highway at whatever speed you rolled, all right? And so therefore, we've got lots of different changes in direction, lots of impacts, lots of opportunity for injury, okay? Body just kind of flails around. One time you may land on your head, the next time you may land on your hip, the next time you may land on an arm and a shoulder. It really just depends on luck of the roll, I suppose you could call it. All right. Multi-systems trauma is very, very, very common in rollovers. Okay. I've seen some really, really nasty rollovers that people walked away from because they were wearing their seatbelt. I've seen some fairly benign looking rollovers that people were dead on scene with because they weren't wearing their seatbelt. Okay, rollovers will cost you very, very quickly, all right? If you're not restrained, if you're lucky, you'll stay in and only bounce off the vehicle about 6 or 8 times. If you're unlucky, you get tossed, okay? So as it rolls and you get projected out the side window, all right, in the same direction the car is rolling and you land, hopefully, what's coming behind you? The car is still coming, right? So your opportunity to wind up underneath that several thousand-pound vehicle is now very likely as well. All right, those typically don't work out very well either. All right, so ejection is very common. All right, obviously we talked about the morbidity and mortality that's associated with just getting ejected, let alone the fact that you got to now try and dodge the car as it's rolling at you, and you may or may not be able to. Right, you're not actually trying to dodge; you're just hoping at that point. All right, so lesson here: wear your seatbelt. Okay. Here's an opportunity. What do you think? So we call this a rotational impact because it's upside down, so it rolled over, okay? And I can tell you from experience, I don't think this rolled more than once. I think this one literally went from its wheels over to its roof, just kind of judging by. But where do we start off at rotational on this one? Nah, what do? We got T-boned, right? And so when we transferred that energy, we started shifting, our center of gravity got off, and we rolled it. Most of the time, these just end up on their side, right? So this is where you drive past the intersection, and you're like, whoa, man, that looks really terrible, right? Because the car's up on its side. It literally hit and just went up because the tires dug in with the friction, and it just rolled up on its side. Most of those people do fairly okay, as long as they were wearing what? Okay, good. Another red car, right? We could go a full subject matter without, right? We had a white one, right? We had a blue one, a few back, okay? Now we've got 2 pictures without a red car, so we had to get one back in there, all right? Notice it's snowing, okay? This is another one that I think they probably slid out, hit the soft ditch, right? Or as soft as it can be when it's frozen. dug the tires in, and this probably just went from wheels to where you see it, because notice all these windows are still pretty much intact. The roof isn't caved down, those kind of things. All right. Here's the one where I talked about, right? So depending on where you hit, what hits, how you hit as you go a dump down the freeway, all right, and how many times you a dump on the way is going to depend on your injuries, okay? When we talk about rollovers, notice this one held up fairly well, which is why I think it's a fairly low speed and didn't go completely over, all right? When this is on its wheels, what are these posts here designed to hold?
The weight of the car. No, I'm sorry, just the roof.
The roof, right? So when it goes upside down, what are they now holding?
It's the weight of the car.
The weight of the car. So typically they don't hold up very well. They compress down, which obviously